Greetings. I am Dr. Noni Davis, and I am coming to you from St. C Academy, an African Center School here in this community. I am the legacy owner. I inherited this business from my parents, my mother, who is still with us, and my late father, William Edward Davis, my mom, Sylvia Davis. And every week I'm trying to introduce a new topic. And this week I want to focus on female Black revolutionaries or Black female revolutionaries um, from our American history, and also to just help us navigate this space. We had an election that we had hoped would go one way. Most of us, 92% of Black women, and 90 some percent or 88 something percent of Black men voted for this woman. And because we know what genocide is, we know what abuse is, we know what segregation and what a regime under somebody who has an affinity for a person like Hitler is. We've lived through this, we've survived this, and we know what it is. And unfortunately, there were too many people who disregarded what we said, and we don't know whether they did it because they really believed in the economy. I'm not going to say that they weren't concerned about the economy, but I am going to say they weren't concerned about the economy because apparently they forgot about COVID, and they forgot about all of the trauma of that experience. They don't remember food shelves in Target being empty and not being able to get toilet paper and not being able to get paper towels, and having to be quarantined, and how it was just horrible. But it's okay. You want to choose to worship skin color and preserve a certain way of thinking that you think you know, but the rest of us are going to remember who we are and where we came from. And so last week I talked about Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, David Walker and Martin Delaney, Amos Beeman, and Henry Highland Garnett, and James Fortin. And these were men who lived in during slavery, men who lived in some of them lived after slavery was defeated in this country in the late 1800s. And we'll talk about the ones that are more current, but talking about the ones who were there in the midst of the foolishness of the enslavement of our ancestors. We talking about them can help us to understand we've been there, and we said we're not going to go back. So let's just affirm that we're not going back. What does that mean? We don't know, but let's look at what our ancestors already did, and let's make sure we acknowledge their heroism. Who was it? I think it was this week I found out that the governor of Maryland made Harriet Tubman a brigadier general for the National Guard of Maryland, honoring her legacy. And so I was like, well, and that's something that was on the 10th that we heard that he made this declaration. And that's the woman who was a pivotal force, a force to be reckoned with. So at the same time we've got this foolishness, we have the acknowledgement of Harriet Tubman being our brigadier general. Guess what? Let's call that energy up and see what happens. Anyway, let's get to it. So I want to open up with Sojourner Truth. I'm going to talk about some Black female revolutionaries, so that hopefully the brothers were encouraged, and now we can get the sisters encouraged, and let's do this thing. So most of us are familiar with Sojourner Truth. She was born Isabel Baumfree. She was an enslaved woman, born in 1797 in New York, and when New York was still considered an area of Dutch New Amsterdam, the Dutch owned that area or had stolen that land from the indigenous people. And she lived in a very violent situation. When she was 9, she was separated from her family, her parents, and sold to this man who the wife beat her frequently, and the husband not only beat her but raped her as well. And so, I mean, that was her circumstance. And she decided that she was going to self emancipate. And I'm trying to think, I think she was pregnant with her owner's uh, child, or she had just had the child when she escaped. Um, but she did have this, wasn't this owner what her life was horrific at the beginning. She wanted to marry this guy, and the owner his owner beat him to death so she couldn't get married. So there was just a lot of trauma, a lot of crisis. But and I hate to say that this is what we just have to deal with, but this is what we had to deal with. And so, she eventually got her freedom. She escaped from this horrible situation with her child. It became a Christian woman, a devout person, and decided that she was going to join the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement. And she went around the country advocating for the freedom of African people, and and then at some point she rallied during the Civil War. She rallied troops, went around getting black soldiers to come and join the Civil War and fight in the Civil War, much like Martin Delany and Frederick Douglass. Um, she also was a suffragette, and she was a suffragette when white women were very upset about black men, about slavery, and wanted to be the only ones to they felt like they should have gotten the right to vote before black men, and when once slavery was over. And one of her commentary was her response that many of us have heard, well, ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman too? And so that was her response to this anti-black female rights in the suffragette movement. And so, but in spite of the trauma that she experienced, this woman went all over the country, advocating for the rights of black people. And she, like I said, she walked off the plantation. I'm trying to think what else did I leave out. And like I said, she spoke before audiences. She was 6 feet tall, very intimidating in height. So I'm thinking maybe she was a fuller woman, or because Fulani women are real tall like that. And so she was an imposing figure, but she was also a very determined woman. So she went from being enslaved to being a voice for the enslaved. Now let me see. Do I have a picture? I'm sorry here of Miss Sojourner Truth. She changed her name from Isabel to Sojourner Truth after she had her religious experience. Okay, so this is me. I have a hard time angling this stuff. And there you go, Sojourner Truth. And so most of us have heard about her. So the next person that I want to talk about is well, I do have Frances Kickley. Do I have a picture of her, Frances Kickley? I'm sorry. All right, so this was a lady. Her name is Frances Kickley. And Frances Kickley, all right, pull it back this way and pull it that way. There you go, and back it up. All right, Frances Kickley was an author, and she was born free. Um, let's see, Frances Ellen Watkins. Oh, wait a minute, is that Frances Elizabeth Kickley? No, Frances Ellen. Oh, sorry, y'all, got the wrong person. So let me just move on to Harriet Fortin Purvis. Um, Harriet Fortin person at Purpose was a woman I talked to you all about. Her father was James Fortin, and her mother was also an abolitionist. I think her name was Charlotte Fortin. So, what happened here? This lady was something else too. So her family was very wealthy. Let's see, Charlotte Fortin. I mean Harriet Fortin. Harriet Fortin. You can see her picture right here. This lady was the daughter of, like I said, the famous James Ford. They were a very wealthy black family. Her father was an inventor. I showed his pictures last week. He invented different things for boats to make navigation easier, I believe. And then also he made different types of sails for the ships to make, navigating easier. So she was an amazing person. She was part of the first biracial abolitionist movement in Philadelphia. She was a female anti-slavery, part of the female anti-slavery society founded by her mother. And she lectured with her husband. She was born free, of course. So she lectured with her husband, who happened to be half Moroccan, half white. So he was also interracial. What was interesting about them is that they were also traveling around the world, but around the country, advocating for the anti-slavery movement. And what is interesting is that I think they were in Philadelphia, where they attended this anti-slavery uh, a meeting, and white men saw her husband, who appeared white, to helping her to get out of the carriage. And they lost their mind because they're like, oh, miscegenation. Oh, no, we're going to have all these mixed race children. Oh, my God. Da, 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 da. And burned down the building. They gathered and burned down the building where these people had gathered to have this meeting. And so fortunately, she and her husband escaped this the situation. But um, the Pennsylvania Hall was burned down to the ground. But not deterred, Harriet and her husband raised $32,000, which today would be the equivalent of $1,172,000 for the anti-slavery movement. And even after the 13th Amendment was ratified, they continued to fight for women's right. She continued to fight for the women's right to vote. She also led a free produce movement, and I guess it would have been one of the first boycotts that Black people engaged in. So they boycotted anything that was made by a slave or through slave labor. They refused to buy it. And I don't know how successful it was, but they were like, oh, that's not going to work. But yeah, we know the boycotts work. So she must have led one of, I don't know, I'm not going to say it was the first one, but it had to be one of the first boycott efforts to to penalize, southern plantations, to penalize the South by not participating in that economy. And so that was amazing. What was also interesting is that before 1860, before the Civil War started, she and her husband moved to Pennsylvania, and they were very active in the William Steele's and Underground Railroad. And but then after the Fugitive Slave Act, and I'm sure we've had a conversation about the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that if someone ran away, if an African ran away, if they were caught, they had to go to court um, and prove, the slave owner had to prove that they were that this was their slave. And of course, we know that they knew that they were lying. They could just pick up anybody and say, hey, I own him, and these white people would send these people back into slavery with little to no proof. And so but anybody who was caught assisting Africans at this point could be penalized, go to jail, be fined, or whatever. So it was very dangerous, extremely dangerous. So Harriet Fortin purposely, I don't care. So she went in, she and her husband had a house on the Underground Railroad, and then they moved a little bit further out to another community in Pennsylvania. I'm trying to see where is it. It was called Byberry, uh, Pennsylvania, and they opened up a house and turned their house into an Underground Railroad, and it, they ended up helping about 9,000. Can you believe this? 9,000 people escaped through their home to Canada. I was like, that number is awfully high. It might be over about like maybe 900, but that's the number they had. 9,000 Africans escaped from slavery through her house. So I'm like, they were really doing it. And she and her husband also founded a school called the Gilbert Lyceum for African American children, including her own. And so she was, and then she, like I said, she was also a suffragette and advocating for the rights of women. So this whole thing of these black women fighting for the rights of women and for the rights of their people, we just did that last week. So the fight is not over. And then so the next person I wanted to talk about was Mary Ann Chad. Mary Ann Chad was something else too. Mary Ann Chad was not playing no games. So this is Mary Ann Chad, and she owned a newspaper. She was the first African American to publish a novel. I think she was the first Black woman publisher in North America. She attended. Excuse me. She was born in, let's see, 1823 in Wilmington, Delaware. Died June 5th, 1893, in Washington D.C. She attended Howard University Law School back in the day. I was like, wow. She was born free to her parents in Delaware and committed to abolitionists. Her parents were abolitionists, and so she moved right into that same space. Moved to Pennsylvania with her parents at the age of 10, so she could attend school, and she became a teacher. She also was part of the Underground Railroad. Can you believe this? And she too had to make an adjustment when the Fugitive Slave Act came along. And so she decided to move to Canada for a while. But when she opened up an interracial school, went up there in Canada, and lectured about abolition of slavery. She was the first Black female newspaper editor in North American history. So that's Canada, United States, and yeah. So she was the first Black female to do that. And after her husband passed away, she returned to the U.S. when the Civil War broke out. Oh, and by the way, she had 3 children, and I think Sojourner also had 3 children. Miss Fortin had 8. So these who were doing this with children, okay, with a whole household, which is unbelievable to me. She let's see, she went out broke when the war broke out. She helped to recruit Black soldiers for the Union War, and let's see, and so like I said, yeah, she attended night school and went to law school at Howard. So, these people were out here in these streets, very determined. And, to me, it would be the equivalent of like Black Lives Matter, the grassroots organizations, move.org, these people who are in these streets, Tamika out here, on the ground, Ben Crump out here on the ground doing this work. And I would like to meet too. I'm gonna add me in because I'm doing the work at SAC Academy, trying to make sure these kids have what they need. So now I'm going to show you. My Frances Ellen Harper. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Uh, Frances. Oh, I wanted to show you Mary Ann Chad's uh, newspaper, and so you see that's her. Jimerson. Okay, Can you imagine? That's out there in the day. So this is Frances Ellen. Or is it Frances Ellen? Okay, that was the Frances Ellen I think I talked to you about earlier. So Frances Ellen Walker was a poet. She wrote her books, and she was born in 1825 and died in 1911. She was the only child of free African Americans, and she was also an abolitionist. Wrote her first short story. She was the first black woman to have her short story published. And published. Okay, so and during Reconstruction, she fought for civil rights. She was the co-founder of the National Association of Colored Women. She also worked with William Steele in Philadelphia with his Underground Railroad. She did a lot of writing and fought with white. She also fought with white suffragists, demanding that black women be included in the women's right to vote. And so I guess she's important because she was a writer, but also just like the other three women I have mentioned here. Um, this was a violent time for them to be out here speaking and moving through spaces where it with ext- with extreme violence against black women, period. And so here we are in this space where we don't know what's going to happen for sure, but we know that there's going to be an attack on our people. But we need to remember, okay, this is not new, and if with the history that we gain, we need to be able to figure out how we are going to navigate through it, just like these women and these men did. Now, the person I really want to talk about is Ida B. Wells. Lord have mercy, that's my girl right there. Um, Ida B. Wells. I love me some Ida B. And she's a Cancer too, like me. I'm a Cancer. She's a Cancer. Lord have mercy. That's my girl. So Ida B. Um, was born in July 16, 1862, in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She died March 25th, 1931, in Chicago, Illinois. She went to college. She went to Fisk University. She went to Russ College and graduated. Now, what she did, it wasn't so much anti-slavery as she was anti-lynching crusade. So she went around the country collecting stories about black people who were lynched or murdered by white moms. And she had a whole lot to say about the mental health and the barbarism of white male violence in the country. And she was the first person to actually publish how crazy they were. Martin Delaney may have done a little bit of it because he wrote a couple of books too that I have, and he definitely did not hold them high self-esteem. But Ida B was not playing with her words. She was not playing. And so for with her, she what happened, she actually had a friend who owned a grocery store, and what some there had been some kind of confusion out in front of his store, and he settled it and sent the white people home and the black people home. Well, later on that night, people his store was attacked, and he was dragged out of his store, taken to a field, and murdered. And this kind of launched her into this space of uh no, you didn't not mess with my folks. She had a history of filing lawsuits. She filed a lawsuit against the train station, filed a lawsuit against white men who I think they had destroyed her printing press. They destroyed her newspaper business, and she had to escape to Chicago, and which is why she was in Chicago, because she was locked and loaded and she was going to hurt somebody, but they definitely were after her. So I think of Asada Shakur when I think of Ida B. Wells as far as pursuing her. She also had a lot of beef with the suffragists. One of the main things she did that was hilarious to me is she who was it? I'm trying to find a white lady that she was beefing with. Her name was Frances Willard. Frances Willard, some white lady who was just trying to say, well, black men, if black men would just stop raping white women, such and such a thing. I mean, they would not be lynched. And so Ida B had a whole lot of words for her, embarrassed the lady, and they had a public fight in the newspaper. So that was interesting. So she was one of the first people I know of that actually laid the white women, laid them out and dragged them very efficiently. And so she had conflict with NAACP. She felt like the reason why she didn't get some positions is because she was so radical, and she actually called Mary McLeod Bethune a softie. I thought that was hilarious because Mary McLeod Bethune was like a velvet glove over an iron fist, also a Cancer. So for her to say that Mary McLeod was easy, I was like, wow, that woman was something else. So, but Ida B, like I said, was the first person to create instead of looking at violence as just something that was happening in these independent incidences and looking at them as separate, she brought them as a collective and looked at it from a sociological perspective, at a lens, and that the brutality was solely to terrorize and murder the African American communities, because following their enslavement, African Americans began building their successful communities, and Southerners saw them as competition and desired to destroy these communities by any means necessary. So, and the name of let's see, her name of her book was Southern Horrors: Lynch Law in All Its Phases and the Red Record Debunked. Um, so we know many of us said that this whole election was about putting black people back in their place. This is hostility and anger towards us because we have managed to uh, build successful businesses and successful lifestyles in spite of white white fragility, white sabotage, white attempts to sabotage our communities. But I want us to know that we are this tree is America is a criminal enterprise. I've heard a couple of people say that, and I agree. It was not formulated, as these people want to say, on God and country, and this was founded on steal, kill, and destroy. Steal, kill, and destroy. And who comes to steal, kill, and destroy? The devil. So it it's a poisonous it's poisonous. It's a poison tree at its roots. And so what do we need to do poison is, we don't even have to do anything. Just step back and watch it just self-destruct. And I believe that just like we have climbed all of these other hills in the past, and we have learned how to navigate the foolishness and, mourn for our brothers and sisters who lost everything, but, regrouped and persevered and built again. And, most of us black people, our definition of freedom is black joy. Our definition of freedom is self autonomy, self determination, self love, perseverance, and like I said, determination. We have to understand that that's not what white people's definition of freedom is. White people's definition of freedom, not all of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but unfortunately, too many of them, is controlling other people. They're not happy unless they are controlling and forcing people to listen and do what they say. So we don't have the same word for freedom. So don't when we talk about freedom, we don't look at what they're saying. And so I want to leave you with that. What is our definition of freedom? And understand that that's what we are going to work for. And don't worry about what other people are doing. Do you take care of yourself, protect yourself, elevate yourself, um, forge relationships with your people, and be safe. Amen. Ashe. Asante Sana. Give thanks.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I walk into the sound of drums.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I know my mom.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I can play the drum.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I can work with my hands.
I'm a St. Cia student.